The red rocks of Arizona stood like ancient sentinels against the winter sky of 1870. Snow had fallen early that year, blanketing the pine forests in pristine white. But the beauty was deceptive. This was harsh country, where the wind could strip flesh from bone and a man could disappear into the wilderness, never to be seen again. Wolf tracks crisscrossed the fresh powder, their prints deep and purposeful, following game trails that wound through the rocky canyons. In the shadows of these mountains, memories lingered like ghosts. 5 winters passed. On a night when the moon hid its face, a band of cavalry had descended upon a peaceful Apache encampment. The soldiers came with orders and prejudice, their rifles speaking a language of finality. When dawn broke, the snow was no longer white. Among the fallen lay a family, a mother still clutching her infant, a father who had tried to shield them both, but their daughter, a child of perhaps 6 summers, was nowhere to be found. The girl had fled into the darkness when the first shots rang out, her bare feet carrying her deep into the forest. Terror drove her forward until exhaustion claimed her small body. She collapsed in a shallow cave, expecting death to find her as it had found her family. Instead, yellow eyes watched her from the darkness. The wolves came not with teeth bared, but with cautious curiosity. Perhaps they recognized a fellow orphan, or perhaps the old spirits of the mountain moved them to mercy. The alpha female, heavy with her own pups, circled the trembling child once, twice, then settled beside her, sharing warmth. Seasons turned, and the child learned the ways of her new family. She ran on all 4s when speed was needed, walked upright when traversing rocky paths. Her fingers, once soft, grew strong from digging roots and gripping stone. She learned to read the wind for the scent of prey, to track rabbits through the snow by the pattern of their fear. When threatened, she could bare her teeth and produce a growl that rose from deep within her chest, a sound that made even seasoned hunters think twice. The pack taught her their language, the angle of ears that spoke of danger, the pitch of a howl that called the family home, the gentle whine that meant affection. Her hair grew wild and long, tangled with pine needles and red earth. Her skin, bronzed by her Apache heritage, bore the scars of survival marks from thorns, from falls, from the harsh education of the wild. She dressed in the pelts of animals that had fed the pack, wearing them with the same practical indifference as her wolf siblings wore their fur. Human speech faded from her memory like morning mist, replaced by the more honest communication of the pack. Down in the valleys, where civilization clung to the edges of the wilderness, stories began to circulate. Trappers spoke in hushed tones of glimpsing a figure that moved like smoke through the trees, human in shape but wild in manner. A prospector swore he'd seen a girl running with wolves under the full moon, her hair streaming behind her like a dark river. The tales grew with each telling, until she became legend. The wolf girl, the Apache ghost, the lost child of the mountains. Mothers used her story to keep children from wandering too far from home. Men boasted they would capture her and civilize her, though none were brave enough to venture deep into wolf territory. The town of Perdition, named with the grim humor common to frontier settlements, sat 30 miles from the mountain range. It was here that Luke Morrison first heard the tales. He sat in the corner of Murphy's saloon, nursing a whiskey and trying to ignore the ache in his chest that had nothing to do with the rot-gut liquor. Luke was 28, though his eyes held the weight of more years. His face bore the weathered look of a man who'd spent more nights under stars than roofs, and his hands, resting on the scarred wood table, showed the calluses of honest work. He'd been drifting for 3 years now, ever since the night bandits had burned his family's small ranch in Texas. His wife Sarah and their infant daughter had been inside when the flames took hold. By the time Luke fought his way past the outlaws, there was nothing left but char and sorrow. The law had done nothing. Frontier justice was often no justice at all. So Luke had buried his dead and ridden north, seeking not vengeance but distance from memories that pursued him more relentlessly than any posse. "I tell you, I seen her clear as day," a grizzled trapper was saying, his voice carrying across the smoky room. Moving through them pines like she owned 'em. Weren't natural, the way she moved, like she was more wolf than woman. "Ah, you're drunk, Jedediah." Another man scoffed. "Probably saw a deer and your pickled brain made it into a story." "I know what I seen," Jedediah insisted, slamming his glass on the bar. "She's real as you or me. That Apache girl what got raised by wolves. Living out there still, wild as the day she was born." Luke listened with half an ear, more interested in the bottom of his glass than frontier tales. But something in the story nagged at him. A child lost, abandoned by the cruelty of men to find what comfort she could in the wild. It struck a chord in his grieving heart, though he couldn't say why. Outside, the sky was taking on the deep red of a desert sunset, the kind that looked like the heavens were bleeding. The old-timers called it a storm sky, and they were seldom wrong. Luke finished his drink and stepped out into the street, where the wind was picking up, carrying the scent of snow from the mountains. He had work at the Patterson Ranch, breaking horses and mending fences. But something in that crimson sky made him restless. He found himself at the general store, purchasing supplies he didn't really need. Extra ammunition, dried beef, coffee. Thompson, the store owner, noticed his distraction. "Planning a trip, Morrison?" "Maybe," Luke replied, not sure himself why he was preparing. "Storm coming." "Aye, and a bad one by the look of it. Best to stay close to town. Them mountains ain't forgiving in a blizzard." But Luke had never been one for taking the safe path. As he loaded his saddlebags, he thought about the story of the wolf girl. Probably just a tale. He reasoned. The frontier was full of such stories. Lost mines, ghost towns, creatures that defied explanation. Yet something drew him toward those red rocks and pine forests. Perhaps it was the whiskey. Or perhaps it was the need to lose himself in a landscape as desolate as his heart. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Russet, snorted nervously as Luke turned him toward the mountain trail. The animal sensed the approaching storm, and, like all creatures of instinct, knew that heading into it was folly. But Luke pressed on, driven by a compulsion he couldn't name. The last sliver of sun disappeared behind the peaks, and the temperature plummeted. The first snowflakes began to fall, large and wet, clinging to Luke's coat and Russet's mane. In the growing darkness, the mountains loomed like slumbering giants, holding their secrets close. Somewhere in those ancient hills, if the stories were true, a girl who had forgotten how to be human ran with the wolves. And Luke Morrison, a man who had forgotten how to live, rode steadily toward her, while the storm gathered its strength for the assault to come. The blizzard struck with the fury of a wounded beast. Within an hour of leaving perdition, Luke could barely see Russet's ears through the driving snow. The wind howled through the pines like a chorus of the damned, and ice crystals stung any exposed skin like tiny needles. He'd been foolish to venture out. He knew that now. But turning back had become impossible. The trail behind him had vanished beneath the white onslaught. Russet stumbled, nearly throwing Luke from the saddle. The horse's breath came in great clouds of steam, and ice was forming on his whiskers. They needed shelter, and they needed it soon. Luke remembered from his previous travels that these mountains were riddled with caves and overhangs, carved by centuries of wind and water. If he could find one deep enough, they might survive the night. Through the swirling chaos, he spotted a darker shadow against the rock face, a cleft in the mountain that promised refuge. Luke dismounted, leading Russet by the reins, feeling his way along the rock wall until the opening widened into a proper cave. It went back perhaps 20 feet, with a ceiling high enough for a man to stand. Dry leaves and old bones littered the floor, suggesting animals had used this shelter before. Luke unsaddled Russet and rubbed him down as best he could, then set about gathering what dry wood he could find near the cave entrance. His fingers were numb despite his gloves, and starting a fire took 3 attempts with his flint and steel. When the flames finally caught, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, Luke allowed himself a moment of relief. He had water, some food, and shelter. He would survive the night. That's when he saw her. She stood at the very edge of the firelight, so still that at first Luke thought his eyes were playing tricks. But no, there was definitely a figure there. watching him from the shadows. As his eyes adjusted, details emerged that made his breath catch. Wild hair, tangled and dark, framing a face that was undeniably human, yet utterly feral. Eyes that caught the firelight and threw it back like a wolf's. She wore rough furs draped over her thin frame, and her bare feet seemed impervious to the cold stone. For a long moment, neither moved. Luke's hand instinctively went to his revolver, but he stopped himself. She was no threat, just a girl, probably no more than 17 or 18 by his reckoning. The stories had been true after all. "Easy," Luke said softly, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "I mean no harm." The girl's response was immediate and startling. A growl rumbled from her throat, low and warning, exactly like a wolf protecting its territory. Her lips pulled back slightly, showing teeth that, while human, were bared in an unmistakably animal threat display. She crouched slightly, weight on the balls of her feet, ready to flee or fight. Luke slowly raised his hands, showing empty palms. "It's all right. Just taking shelter from the storm, same as you, I reckon." He kept his voice calm, steady, though his heart was racing. This was no mere story told in saloons. This was real, impossible and real. The firelight played across her features, and Luke could see her Apache heritage in the high cheekbones, the bronze skin, the dark eyes that held depths of wildness he'd never seen in a human face. But there was intelligence there too, sharp and assessing. She was studying him as intently as he was studying her. The wind chose that moment to send a particularly vicious gust into the cave, carrying with it a spray of snow and the sound of something else, a whimper of pain. The girl's head snapped toward the sound, and her entire demeanor changed. The aggression melted into concern as she turned and moved deeper into the cave. Beyond the reach of Luke's firelight, he heard her making soft sounds, not quite human speech, but purposeful vocalizations nonetheless. Curious despite himself, Luke added another branch to his fire and held up a burning stick as a torch. Peering into the darkness, what he saw made him understand. A wolf lay on its side, panting heavily, one hind leg twisted at an ugly angle. Fresh blood stained the fur around the wound. The girl knelt beside it, running her hands over the injured animal with surprising gentleness, making those soft, comforting sounds. "Caught in a trap, looks like," Luke said, though he doubted she understood. He'd seen similar injuries before. Some thoughtless trapper had probably set a leg-hold trap and never checked it. The wolf had likely chewed itself free, breaking the leg in the process. The girl looked up at him, and for the first time, he saw something beyond the wildness. A plea. She was asking for help, or at least for him not to harm the injured wolf. It was her family, Luke realized, perhaps the only family she'd known for years. Moving slowly, telegraphing his intentions, Luke reached into his saddlebags. He had some cloth bandages and a small flask of whiskey for cleaning wounds. Frontier medicine, but better than nothing. The girl tensed as he approached, but didn't growl this time. The wolf, however, bared its fangs weakly. "Easy, boy," Luke murmured, though he kept his distance. "Let me see what I can do." It took patience. Luke set the supplies down and backed away, letting the girl examine them. She sniffed the bandages, recoiled from the whiskey's sharp scent, then looked between Luke and the wolf with what could only be called contemplation. Finally, she made a decision. With gestures and those strange vocalizations, she seemed to be explaining something to the wolf, calming it. What followed was one of the most extraordinary things Luke had ever witnessed. Working together, with the girl holding the wolf still and making constant reassuring sounds, Luke was able to clean and bind the wound. The wolf snapped once, catching Luke's sleeve but not breaking skin, a warning rather than an attack. Throughout it all, the girl's eyes never left Luke's face, watching for any sign of treachery. When it was done, the wolf's breathing had eased somewhat. It wouldn't be running any time soon, but with care, it might heal. The girl stroked its head, and the wolf licked her hand. a gesture so tender and familial that Luke felt like an intruder witnessing something sacred. He retreated to his side of the fire, and they sat in silence as the storm raged outside. The girl never fully relaxed, never turned her back to him, but some of the extreme tension had left her posture. She pulled dried meat from somewhere in her furs and shared it with the wolf, tearing off small pieces and feeding them gently. Luke pulled out his own meager supplies, hardtack and dried beef. On impulse, he set aside a portion on a flat rock and pushed it toward the center of the cave, a peace offering. The girl watched but made no move toward it. However, when Luke deliberately turned his attention to tending the fire, he heard movement. When he glanced back, the food was gone. The night stretched on. Luke found himself talking quietly, not expecting understanding, but needing to fill the silence with something other than the storm's fury. He talked about inconsequential things: his horse, the weather, the quality of the wood burning in the fire. The girl listened, or at least appeared to, her head tilted slightly in a gesture reminiscent of the wolves she lived among. Once, when Luke's voice trailed off, she made a sound, not quite a word, but deliberate. When he looked at her, she gestured toward him, then touched her throat. It took him a moment to understand. She wanted him to keep talking. The human voice, even speaking words she'd forgotten, still held some appeal, some deep memory of what she'd been before the wilderness claimed her. So Luke talked on, his voice growing hoarse. He found himself telling her things he hadn't spoken of to anyone. Sarah's laugh, the way his daughter had gripped his finger with her tiny hand, the dreams he'd had of building something lasting on the frontier. The girl's eyes grew heavy, though she fought sleep with the determination of a wild thing that knew survival meant vigilance. When dawn finally came, bringing with it an easing of the storm, Luke woke from a light doze to find the cave empty save for himself and Russet. The girl and her wolf were gone, vanished as completely as if they'd been a dream. Only the blood-stained ground where the wolf had lain and the faint impressions of bare feet in the dust proved that the night had been real. Luke packed his gear slowly, his mind replaying every moment of the encounter, as he led Russet from the cave into a world made new by snow. He noticed tracks leading higher into the mountains, human footprints accompanied by the dragging mark of an injured wolf. They'd left together, back to whatever hidden den they called home. He should have been relieved. He should have mounted up and ridden back to perdition with a story no one would believe. Instead, Luke found himself memorizing the direction of those tracks, the shape of the peaks above. Something had shifted in the night, some connection forged in the sharing of shelter and the tending of wounds. He'd come to the mountains lost in his own grief, but he'd found something unexpected, a reminder that even in the wildest places, even in the most damaged souls, humanity could still flicker like a flame in the darkness. As he mounted Russet and began the journey back to town, Luke knew with certainty that this wasn't the end. The storm had brought them together, and he sensed that fate wasn't done with them yet. Somewhere above him, a girl who'd forgotten how to be human traveled with her wolf family, and below, a man who'd forgotten how to hope found himself looking forward to something for the first time in 3 years. The morning sun broke through the clouds, setting the snow-covered peaks ablaze with light. It was a new day in the Arizona mountains, and Luke Morrison rode toward town with the image of Wild Eyes burned into his memory and a strange, inexplicable pull to return. The ride back to perdition took most of the day, with Russet picking his way carefully through the fresh snow. By the time Luke reached the town's muddy main street, word of his survival had somehow preceded him. Men gathered outside Murphy's saloon, their breath fogging in the cold air as they watched him approach. "Well, I'll be damned," called out Jake Henderson, the blacksmith. "We figured you for wolf food. Morrison. No man rides into a storm like that and comes back." Luke dismounted stiffly, his joints protesting after the cold night and long ride. "Takes more than a blizzard to put me down," he said simply, leading Russet toward the livery stable. But inside Murphy's, with whiskey warming his belly and the heat of the potbelly stove thawing his bones, Luke found himself in the center of attention. Men who usually paid him no mind now pressed close, eager for a tale of survival. Come on, Morrison, Murphy himself urged, refilling Luke's glass without being asked. You must have found shelter somewhere. See anything interesting up in them mountains? Luke hesitated. The image of the wild girl flashing through his mind. He could tell them, spin it into a yarn that would buy him drinks for a week. But something held him back. That moment in the cave had been too real, too private to turn into saloon entertainment. Found a cave, he said finally. Waited out the storm. Nothing special. But Jedediah, the old trapper, was watching him with knowing eyes. Nothing special, he says. Man's got that look, boys. The look of someone who's seen something that ain't quite of this world. Leave it be, Jed, Luke warned quietly. I knew it. Jedediah slapped the bar triumphantly. You seen her, didn't you? The wolf girl. I told you boys she was real. The saloon erupted. Men who'd been drowsing over their drinks suddenly came alive, shouting questions, demanding details. Luke remained silent, but his silence only fueled their certainty. She attack you? She pretty under all that wild? How many wolves with her? You should have brought her back, civilized her. That last comment, from a rough-looking man named Garrett, who trapped for a living, sparked something in Luke. She's not an animal to be captured, he said, his voice carrying an edge that made men step back. Ain't she? Garrett challenged. Emboldened by whiskey. Living like a beast. Probably don't even remember she's human. Would be a mercy to bring her in. Clean her up. Teach her proper ways again. Whose proper ways? Luke stood slowly, his hand resting casually near his gun belt. Yours, the same kind of men who likely killed her family and left her to the wolves in the first place. The saloon grew quiet. Everyone knew the stories of cavalry raids on Apache camps. Though few spoke of them openly, it was easier to pretend the frontier had been won cleanly, without blood on their collective hands. Now see here, Morrison, Mayor Bradshaw interjected, his political instincts sensing trouble. Nobody's talking about the past, but if there's a white girl living wild, she's Apache. Luke cut him off. Well then, Bradshaw continued smoothly. An Apache girl living wild. It's our Christian duty to help her, bring her back to civilization. The church runs a school for Indian children up in Colorado, teaches them to be productive members of society. Luke had heard of such schools, places where children were stripped of their names, their language, their heritage, and beaten if they tried to remember who they'd been. The thought of the wild girl in such a place made his stomach turn. She's surviving just fine where she is, Luke said flatly. Leave her be. But he could see in their eyes that his words had the opposite effect. Where before the wolf girl had been merely a legend, a story to frighten children and amuse drunks, now she was real, and real meant opportunity. Boys, Garrett was saying to a group of equally rough-looking men, I'm thinking it might be time for a hunting expedition. That girl's probably worth something to somebody. If not the government, then maybe one of them traveling shows. People pay good money to see wild things. Luke's fist connected with Garrett's jaw before he'd made a conscious decision to throw it. The trapper went down hard, taking a table with him. The saloon erupted into chaos, some men trying to break up the fight, others choosing sides. Luke found himself swinging at anyone who came close, rage fueling his fists. These men, with their small minds and greedy hearts, would turn that girl into a circus attraction, a thing to be gawked at and prodded. When the dust settled, Luke had a split lip and bruised knuckles, but Garrett and two of his friends were worse off. Sheriff Watson, roused from his afternoon nap, surveyed the damage with weary eyes. That's enough excitement for one day, he declared. Morrison, you'd best cool off somewhere else. Garrett, you and your boys stay out of them mountains unless you got legitimate business there. I won't have the town turned upside down over some wild girl who may or may not exist. But Luke could see the sheriff's words carried no real weight. The damage was done. By morning, half the town would be planning expeditions to capture the Apache girl raised by wolves. Luke left the saloon, his mind racing. He'd made things worse by returning, by letting them see the truth in his eyes. He should have lied better, should have laughed off Jedediah's accusations. Now she was in danger because of him. He found himself at the general store again, Thompson eyeing him warily as he purchased more supplies. Rope, blankets, ammunition, dried food, enough for an extended stay in the mountains. "You fixing to move up there permanent, Morrison?" Thompson asked. "Maybe," Luke replied. "Town's getting a bit crowded for my taste." That night, Luke sat in his small rented room above the barber's shop, cleaning his rifle and thinking. He'd come to Perdition looking for nothing more than work and solitude, a place to lose himself in the daily grind of frontier life. Instead, he'd found a purpose he hadn't expected, protecting a girl who didn't even know she needed protecting. Through his window, he could see men gathering in small groups, their voices carrying on the cold air. Plans were being made. Garrett, sporting a magnificent black eye, was holding court outside the hotel, drawing rough maps in the dirt with a stick. Others were checking weapons, preparing supplies. By dawn, Luke estimated, at least 3 separate groups would head for the mountains. He thought about warning her, but how? She'd vanished like smoke, leaving only tracks that were probably already covered by fresh snow. The mountains were vast, full of hidden valleys and secret paths. She'd survived this long by being invisible. Maybe she could continue, but then Luke remembered the injured wolf, how it would slow them down. He remembered the plea in her eyes when she'd asked for his help. She'd trusted him, if only for a moment, and that trust now put her in danger. As the town settled into uneasy sleep, Luke made his decision. He'd ride out before dawn, not to capture her, but to find her first, to warn her. It was a fool's errand. The mountains were enormous, and she knew them far better than he did, but he had to try. He packed carefully, taking only what was essential. At the last moment, he added something else, a small mirror that had belonged to Sarah, one of the few things he'd saved from the fire. He wasn't sure why, only that it seemed right, a piece of humanity to offer, should he find her again. The clock on the church tower struck midnight as Luke finished his preparations. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle this time, like a blessing. Somewhere in those mountains, a girl who'd forgotten how to be human curled up with her wolf family, unaware that the world of men was preparing to intrude on her wild freedom. Luke Morrison, a man who'd thought he had nothing left to fight for, checked his weapons one more time. Come morning, he'd be riding into the unknown again, but this time with purpose. The hunters would be coming, driven by greed and the need to tame what they couldn't understand, but they'd have to go through him first. He allowed himself a grim smile. He'd failed to protect his own family, had arrived too late to save them, but maybe, just maybe, he could save her. It wasn't redemption. Nothing could give him that, but it was something. In a world that seemed determined to destroy everything wild and free, he could stand on the side of preservation, just this once. The snow continued to fall, covering the muddy streets in pristine white, hiding the ugliness beneath. By dawn, it would all look clean and new, but Luke knew better. Beneath that pure surface, darkness stirred, and greed sharpened its claws. The hunt for the Apache girl raised by wolves was about to begin. Luke was already 5 miles into the mountains when he heard the first gunshot echo through the valleys. The sound made his blood run cold. He'd left before dawn, hoping to get ahead of the hunting parties, but either they'd started earlier than expected or someone had gotten lucky. He spurred Russet forward, following his memory of where those tracks had led after the storm. The terrain was treacherous, with fresh snow hiding ice patches and loose rocks. More gunshots rang out. Closer now, and Luke could hear men shouting in the distance. Cresting a ridge, he saw them. Garrett's group, spread out in a rough line, driving something before them like hunters flushing game. Through the trees, Luke caught glimpses of movement, too quick and fluid to be human, too upright to be wolves. They were herding her toward a box canyon, a natural trap with steep walls and only one way out. Luke didn't think, just acted. He fired his rifle into the air, the sharp crack splitting the morning. The hunters turned, confused, giving their quarry precious seconds to change direction. Luke saw her then, clearly. running with 3 wolves at her side. The injured wolf from the cave limped behind, struggling to keep up. "Morrison!" Garrett's voice carried across the distance. "What the hell are you doing?" "Turn back," Luke shouted. "This isn't right." But Garrett and his men were already moving to cut off the girl's new escape route. Luke cursed and rode hard, trying to intercept them. The mountainside exploded into chaos, men shouting, horses whinnying, wolves snarling. The girl and her pack were trapped between the hunters and a sheer cliff face. That's when Luke saw her make a decision that took his breath away. Instead of fleeing, she turned to face the hunters, placing herself between them and the injured wolf. Her lips pulled back in that feral snarl he remembered. But this time there was something more, a fierce protectiveness that was utterly human. "Look at that," one of Garrett's men breathed. "She's protecting them beasts." Makes it easier," Garrett said, raising his rifle. "Take her down gentle-like, boys. We want her alive if possible, but dead's better than letting her escape." Luke rode between them, his horse blocking their shot. "You'll have to go through me first. Move aside, Morrison. This ain't your concern. I'm making it my concern." The standoff stretched taut. Luke could feel the girl's eyes on him, wild and uncomprehending. The wolves growled low, sensing the tension. Then everything happened at once. One of Garrett's men, younger and more nervous than the rest, fired at the wolves. His shot went wide, but it sparked an avalanche of violence. The wolves scattered, the girl ran, and suddenly the air was full of gunfire. Luke saw the girl stumble, saw red bloom on her shoulder, and something inside him snapped. He charged Garrett, knocking him from his horse. They hit the ground hard, rolling in the snow, fists flying. Around them, the other hunters tried to pursue the girl, but the terrain worked against them now. She knew these paths like the wolves knew them, even wounded. Luke managed to pin Garrett, his fist raised for another blow, when he heard a scream, not quite human, not quite animal. The injured wolf had fallen, unable to continue. The girl had returned for it, cradling its head in her lap as blood spread beneath them. Not the wolf's blood, Luke realized with growing horror. Hers. The bullet had done more damage than he'd thought. "Enough!" Luke roared, pulling his revolver and firing into the air. "Enough! Can't you see what we've done?" The hunters paused, some looking ashamed, others merely frustrated at losing their prize. Luke left Garrett in the snow and approached the girl slowly, hands visible and empty. She looked up at him with those wild eyes, now clouded with pain and confusion. Blood seeped through the fur covering her shoulder. "Let me help," Luke said softly. "Please." She bared her teeth weakly, but there was no real threat in it. The fight was leaving her along with her blood. The other wolves circled nervously, torn between loyalty and survival instinct. "Morrison, step away." Sheriff Watson's voice cut through the scene. The lawman had arrived with another group, drawn by the gunfire. "This has gone far enough. She needs a doctor," Luke said without turning. "She needs to be contained," Watson replied. "Wild thing like that, living with wolves. She's a danger to herself and others." Luke looked at the girl, really looked at her. Beneath the wildness, beneath the animal behaviors, he saw the child she'd been, Apache features delicate despite the harsh life, intelligence flickering behind the fear. She was maybe 17, 18 at most, just a child when tragedy struck, forced to become something else to survive. "The only danger here is us," Luke said quietly. He shrugged off his coat, moving slowly, and pressed it against her wounded shoulder. She flinched but didn't pull away. The injured wolf whimpered, and she made those soft, comforting sounds Luke remembered from the cave. Even dying, her first instinct was to comfort her family. "We can't just leave her here," Watson said, though his voice had lost some of its authority. "If she dies, it's on all of us." "Then let me take her," Luke said. "I'll tend her wound, keep her safe. When she's healed, she can choose, stay with men or return to the mountains." "You think you can tame her?" Garrett spat blood into the snow. "She's more animal than person now. I'm not trying to tame her," Luke replied. I'm trying to save her." The girl's eyes were fluttering closed, her body going limp. Luke made the decision for all of them. He gathered her carefully, surprised at how light she was despite her fierce appearance. She made a weak sound of protest, reaching for the injured wolf. "I'll come back for him," Luke promised, not knowing if she understood. "I swear it." He carried her to Russet, who shied nervously at the wild scent but held steady. The other wolves had melted back into the forest, all except one, a young female who watched from the tree line with eyes too intelligent to be mere animal. "You tell the others," Luke said to the wolf, feeling slightly foolish. "I'll take care of her." He mounted carefully, cradling the girl against his chest. She was burning with fever already, her body fighting the invasion of lead and infection. The ride down the mountain was a nightmare of careful steps and constant vigilance. Luke terrified that every jostle might be the one that finished her. Behind him, he could hear the men arguing, some wanting to follow, others arguing they'd done enough damage. Sheriff Watson's voice rose above the rest, establishing order, sending some to fetch the town doctor. At least there was that. The girl stirred once during the ride, her eyes focusing briefly on Luke's face. She said something, a word in Apache that Luke didn't understand. Then her hand, smaller than he'd expected and calloused from years of survival, gripped his shirt like a child seeking comfort. In that moment, she wasn't the wild wolf girl of legend. She was just hurt and scared, and far from anything she'd known as home. "Hold on," Luke whispered. "Just hold on." The sun was high by the time they reached the lower elevations. Luke could see riders approaching, the doctor, he hoped. The girl's breathing was shallow, her skin too pale beneath the dirt and weather browning. But she was alive. That had to count for something. As they met the approaching riders, Luke found himself making silent promises. He'd protect her from those who would cage her. He'd stand between her and a world that didn't understand. He'd failed to save his family, but maybe he could save this wild, lost child who'd touched something in his dead heart. The doctor, a competent man named Samuel Hayes, took one look at the girl and shook his head. "This is beyond simple frontier medicine. Morrison, she needs proper care." "Then we'll get her proper care," Luke said firmly. "But she stays free. That's not negotiable." "Doctor," Hayes studied Luke's face, then nodded slowly. "There's a place, my cabin outside town. Quiet, private. We can treat her there. But Morrison, if she lives, what then? She can't go back to the wolves, not injured like this, but she's not ready for town life either." Luke looked down at the girl in his arms, felt the trust in her desperate grip, and made the only answer he could. "Then I'll stay with her, as long as it takes. She saved my life that night in the cave. Doctor, gave me a reason to keep going when I had none. I owe her this." The doctor nodded, understanding more than Luke had said. "Then let's hurry. Every minute counts now." As they rode toward uncertain salvation, Luke thought about the strange turns of fate. He'd come to the mountains empty, looking for nothing. He'd found her, wild, free, untamed. Now she lay broken in his arms because men couldn't leave beauty wild, couldn't let mystery remain mysterious. But she was alive, and as long as she drew breath, Luke Morrison would stand between her and a world that would rather see her caged than free. The young wolf still watched from the ridge above, guardian and witness. Luke met those yellow eyes and nodded once. The pack would wait. They would watch. And when their sister was strong enough to choose, they would be there, calling her home with voices that spoke of belonging without words. Doctor. Hayes's cabin sat in a grove of cottonwoods, far enough from town to offer privacy but close enough for supplies. It was here that Luke spent the longest days of his life, watching over the wild girl as she fought through fever and infection. The doctor had extracted the bullet cleanly, but the greater battle was within. Her body, unused to human dwelling and medicine, seemed to reject every comfort. For 3 days she burned with fever, thrashing and crying out in a mixture of wolf sounds and broken Apache words. Luke stayed by her side, cooling her with wet cloths, holding her still when the doctor needed to change bandages. Sometimes she would grab his hand with surprising strength, her eyes focusing on his face with something like recognition before the delirium claimed her again. On the fourth night, the fever broke. Luke had dozed in his chair when he felt eyes upon him. She was awake, truly awake, watching him with that intense, assessing gaze he remembered from the cave. The wildness was still there, but muted by exhaustion and pain. "Water?" Luke offered, keeping his voice soft. She didn't respond verbally, but allowed him to help her drink. Her movements were careful, controlled, like a wounded animal trying not to show weakness. When she'd had enough, she pushed the cup away and attempted to sit up, looking around the cabin with growing alarm. "Safe," Luke said, hoping she might understand the tone if not the word. "You're safe here." She made a soft, interrogative sound, not quite human speech. Her good hand went to her wounded shoulder, exploring the bandages with confusion. Then she looked toward the window, where moonlight streamed in, and made a low whine that Luke recognized. She was calling for her pack. "They're out there," Luke said, moving to the window. Sure enough, he could see eyes gleaming in the darkness beyond the tree line. "Waiting for you, but you need to heal first." Days passed in strange companionship. The girl, Luke had started thinking of her as Mila, though he didn't know her true name, remained wary but no longer hostile. She would accept food from his hand, though she often seemed puzzled by cooked meat and bread. The doctor visited daily, impressed by her rapid healing but concerned about her continued silence. Physical trauma aside, "Doctor," Hayes told Luke privately, "I believe she's capable of speech. The vocal cords are intact. It's a matter of memory, of remembering how to form words." Luke began talking to her constantly, narrating his activities, telling stories, anything to fill the silence with human voice. Sometimes he caught her lips moving slightly, as if trying to remember the shape of words. Once, when he was telling her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, he saw tears in her eyes, the first purely human emotion he'd witnessed from her. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Luke had brought the small mirror, Sarah's mirror, and left it on the table while he prepared food. He heard a crash and turned to find Mila backing away from it, her eyes wide with shock. The mirror lay on the floor, cracked but not shattered. She was staring at her hands, then touching her face, looking between her reflection in the broken mirror and Luke with dawning horror. It was as if she was seeing herself, truly seeing herself as human for the first time in years. "It's all right," Luke said, approaching slowly. "That's you. That's just you." She made a sound that was almost a word, her mouth working to form something forgotten. Then, in a voice rough from disuse and barely above a whisper, she spoke, "Not wolf?" They were the first human words she'd spoken in perhaps a decade, and they broke Luke's heart. He knelt beside her, careful not to touch without permission. "No," he said gently. "Not wolf. Human, like me." She looked at him with such confusion, such loss, that he understood. For years, her identity had been simple. She was pack, she was wolf in all but body. Now, faced with her human reflection, that certainty was crumbling. Over the following days, words came back to her slowly, like water seeping through a dam. Simple things first. Water, food, hurt, then more complex concepts, though she mixed Apache and English in ways that told the story of her early childhood. She remembered fragments, a mother singing, a father's laugh, the day the soldiers came. "Family, gone," she said one evening, staring into the fire. "Wolves, find me, become new family." "I know," Luke said. "I lost my family too. Fire took them." She studied him with those penetrating eyes. "You, lone wolf now." The description was so apt it made him smile sadly. "I suppose I am. Lone wolves." She paused, searching for words. "Not good. Need pack." As her strength returned, so did her restlessness. She would stand at the window for hours, watching the forest, making soft sounds when she spotted her pack. The wolves were always there, patient shadows waiting for their lost member to return. One morning, Luke found her trying to remove her bandages. When he moved to stop her, she fixed him with a look that was purely human in its determination. "Must go back," she said. "You're not healed yet." "No." She shook her head, frustration clear in every line of her body. "Must go back before I forget how to be wolf." It was then Luke understood the terrible position she was in, caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. Every day she spent in the cabin, every word she remembered, took her further from the only family she'd known. But her wound, still tender and healing, wouldn't survive the harsh life of the pack. "What if," Luke said carefully, "you didn't have to choose?" She tilted her head in that wolfish gesture of curiosity. "Stay here until you're healed. I'll teach you human ways, not to replace wolf ways, but to add to them. And when you're strong, you can visit your pack. Be both." "Both?" The concept seemed to puzzle her. "Why not? You're already both. Part of you remembers being human. Part of you will always be wolf. Maybe that's not wrong. Maybe it's just different." She considered this for a long time, watching the wolves beyond the window. Finally, she nodded slowly. "You teach? I'll teach." What followed were some of the strangest and most meaningful weeks of Luke's life. He taught her practical things, how to tend a fire properly, how to use human tools, how to read simple words. She taught him in return, though she didn't realize it, how to read the subtle signs of the forest, how to move silently, how to understand the complex social dynamics of the pack that waited patiently outside. She was a quick learner when she chose to be, though some human customs baffled her. Clothes were a particular struggle. She understood their practical purpose, but found them constraining. Table manners were another challenge. More than once, Luke found himself biting back laughter as she growled at a particularly tough piece of meat before remembering to use a knife. But it was in the quiet moments that the real healing happened, when she would sit by the fire and haltingly tell him about her years with the wolves, the first winter when she nearly died, the old alpha who had accepted her as pack, the joy of running free under the moon. And Luke found himself sharing too, about Sarah's gentle nature, about his daughter's first laugh, about the emptiness that had driven him to these mountains. One evening, as snow began to fall again outside, Mila, she had finally told him her Apache name, which sounded like that to his ears, sat closer to him than usual. The wolves had been particularly vocal that night, their howls carrying on the wind. "They saying winter is hard coming," she translated. "Much snow. Prey will hide deep. Are they asking you to return?" She nodded. "Always asking. But," she touched her shoulder, where the wound had left a scar. "They understand. Wait for me to choose." "And what do you choose?" She was quiet for a long moment, then looked at him with eyes that held both wild gold and human warmth. "Luke, teach me something?" "What's that?" "This." She gestured vaguely between them. "This feeling, when you near... She struggled for words. "Heart feels different. Not wolf feeling, not old life feeling. New." Luke's breath caught. He'd been so focused on helping her heal, on protecting her, that he hadn't acknowledged what had been growing between them. But she, with the directness of the wild, had named it. "That's..." he started, then stopped. "How did you explain feelings to someone who'd lived by instinct for so long?" "That's human connection, caring. Maybe something more." She moved closer still, studying his face with that intense focus. More. Instead of words, Luke did something that surprised them both, moving slowly, telegraphing his intent. He reached out and gently touched her face. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into his hand like she'd seen her wolves do with each other, a gesture of trust, of belonging. "This feeling," she said softly, "make me more human or make you more wolf?" "Maybe both," Luke admitted. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face. It was unpracticed, a little crooked, but utterly genuine. Both is good. As the snow continued to fall, they sat together in comfortable silence. Outside, the wolves sang their ancient songs. Inside, two damaged souls found in each other a bridge between worlds, a way to be both wild and civilized, both heart and instinct. The healing was far from complete. There would be setbacks, moments when the wild would call too strongly or the human world would press too close. But for now, in the warmth of the cabin with the winter closing in, they had found something neither had thought possible. A pack of two, strange and unlikely, but no less real for its oddness. The moment of reckoning came sooner than Luke had hoped. He'd taken Mila to town for supplies, believing enough time had passed for tempers to cool. She wore a simple dress that misses. Haze had altered to fit her slight frame, though she moved in it like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Careful, constrained, alert to every sound and movement, they'd managed to visit the general store without incident. Thompson had served them with nervous efficiency. And Mila had been fascinated by the variety of goods, touching fabrics and examining tools with curious fingers. Luke had begun to relax, thinking perhaps the town could accept her after all. Then Garrett appeared with several rough-looking men, blocking their path on the boardwalk. Well, Garrett drawled, his face still bearing faint bruises from their mountain encounter. The wild thing cleans up nice, doesn't she? Almost looks civilized. Mila tensed beside Luke, a low sound starting in her throat. He placed a calming hand on her arm. We're not looking for trouble. Garrett? Trouble? Garrett stepped closer, and Mila shifted her weight, preparing to fight or flee. We're the ones keeping this town safe from savages and their sympathizers. A crowd was gathering, drawn by the prospect of confrontation. Luke saw mixed reactions, some curious, some hostile, others merely uncertain. Sheriff Watson emerged from his office, his hand resting on his pistol. That's enough. Garrett, Morrison and the girl have every right to— Rights? Garrett spat. This creature lived with wolves. Who knows what diseases she carries, what savage ways she's hiding under that dress. And Morrison here thinks he can parade her through town like she's a proper woman. I am not creature. The words erupted from Mila with such fierce clarity that everyone stepped back. Her English, though accented, carried the authority of truth. I am person. I survive when family die. Wolves show kindness when humans show none. Who is savage? The crowd murmured, some swayed by her words, others made more uncomfortable by her eloquence. It was easier to dismiss her when she couldn't speak for herself. Listen to her, a woman called out, Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife. Sounds plenty human to me, speaking better than some folks I could name. But Garrett wasn't finished. Words don't change what she is, living like an animal, probably doing things with them wolves that ain't natural. The insult was too much. Mila moved with liquid speed, her hand striking Garrett across the face with a crack that echoed down the street. He staggered back, hand to his cheek, rage twisting his features. You see, he roared. Still a wild animal. She needs to be locked up. The only animal I see here is you, Luke said quietly, stepping between them, making ugly suggestions about a girl who survived horrors you can't imagine. Girl? Garrett laughed bitterly. That's no girl. That's a thing that forgot how to be human. Probably killed to survive, eaten raw meat like a beast. Yes. Mila's single word stopped him cold. She stood straighter, meeting the eyes of the crowd without shame. Yes, I hunt. Yes, I kill to eat. Yes, I eat raw when fire brings enemies. I survive. You— She pointed at Garrett, then swept her hand across the crowd. You kill for land, for gold, for nothing. You burn homes, steal children, leave families to die. Then you call me savage. The silence was deafening. Everyone knew the truth in her words, the recent history written in blood across the frontier. But knowing and acknowledging were different things. An old man pushed through the crowd. Samuel Whitehorse, one of the few Apache allowed to trade in town. His presence tolerated because of his skill with horses. He looked at Mila with eyes that held recognition and sorrow. I knew your father, he said in Apache, then switched to English for the crowd. Strong man, good man. Died protecting family from soldiers who came at night. No warning, no mercy. He turned to face the townspeople. This girl's survivor, not savage. You want to punish her for living when you killed her people? The crowd shifted uneasily. Sheriff Watson cleared his throat. Nobody's punishing anyone, but the fact remains. She can't just integrate into town life like nothing happened. People are scared. Scared of what? Luke demanded. That she'll remind them of their own savagery. That she survived what would have killed most of them. I not want your town, Mila said suddenly. I not want your scared people, your small hearts. But Luke say I need learn human ways to choose. So I learn, I choose. But you, she looked directly at Garrett. You choose to be less than wolf. Wolf not kill for hate. Wolf not lie about others to make self feel big. Pastor Williams had arrived, drawn by the commotion. The elderly minister looked at Mila with thoughtful eyes. The child speaks wisdom. He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone. Perhaps we should consider what Christian charity truly means. Christian charity? Garrett scoffed. For a heathen who probably doesn't even know God? I know spirit, Mila said firmly. Sky Father, Earth Mother, spirits of wind and stone and growing things. Wolves teach me to pray for life given. You thank your God before meals. Is different? Pastor Williams smiled slightly. Not so different, child. Not so different at all. The crowd was dividing now, some nodding agreement with the pastor, others rallying behind Garrett's fear and prejudice. Luke could feel the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Then a small voice piped up. She's pretty. Little Emma Patterson, the minister's daughter, had slipped through the adults to stand before Mila, looking up with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Are the wolves pretty too? Do they let you pet them? Mila's fierce expression softened. She knelt carefully, bringing herself to the child's level. Wolves, beautiful, she said gently. Silver and gray like moon shadows. But not for petting. They wild, free. I show you tracks sometime. Teach you their songs. Emma nodded enthusiastically, then threw her small arms around Mila's neck in an impulsive hug. Mila froze, clearly unprepared for the gesture, then awkwardly patted the child's back. Emma! Mrs. Patterson started forward, then stopped as she saw her daughter's delighted face. She smells like pine trees. Mama, Emma announced. And she's warm. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. It was hard to maintain fear of someone being hugged by a 5-year-old. Sheriff Watson seized the moment. All right, folks. Show's over. Everyone go about your business. He fixed Garrett with a hard look. That means you too. Any more trouble and you'll be cooling your heels in my jail. As the crowd dispersed, some still muttering, others looking thoughtful, Luke felt Mila trembling beside him. The confrontation had cost her more than she'd shown. You did well, he murmured. Did I? She looked up at him. Vulnerable uncertainty replacing her fierce mask. They still fear me, still want me gone. Some do. Luke agreed. But not all. You reached some of them today. That's a start. Samuel Whitehorse approached them before they left. Your father's name was Joseph Crow Feather, he told Mila in Apache. Your mother, Mary Lookingglass. They loved you much. Be proud of their blood, their strength. It lives in you. Mila's eyes filled with tears, the first Luke had seen her shed for her lost human family. Thank you, grandfather, she whispered in Apache. As they rode back to the cabin, Mila was quiet. Finally, she spoke. Emma, not afraid. Why? Children see clearer sometimes, Luke said. She saw you, not the stories about you. I want... Mila paused, struggling with the complexity of her feelings. I want to be in both worlds, but town not want me, and staying human world means leaving wolf family more and more. Luke reined in Russet, turning to face her. You don't have to choose today, or tomorrow. Take your time. She studied his face. You patient with me. Why? Because you were patient with me that night in the cave. Because you're worth being patient for. He hesitated, then added, because I care what happens to you. Care, she repeated softly. Human word for pack feeling. Something like that. As they continued toward the cabin, the afternoon sun slanted through the pines. Behind them, the town grappled with questions that had no easy answers. Ahead, the wolves waited in the forest, patient as always. Mila rode in silence, but her hand found Luke's across the space between their horses. It was a small gesture, but it spoke of trust, of connection, of two worlds slowly learning to exist in one heart. The path forward was far from clear, but for the first time since that night in the cave, both of them felt something that had been foreign for too long: hope. The confrontation in town had shown the worst of humanity's fear and prejudice, but also glimmers of its capacity for growth and acceptance. Little Emma's hug had perhaps done more than all of Luke's arguments to humanize the wild girl in the town's eyes, and Mila herself had proven she could stand in the human world and speak her truth without losing the fierce spirit that had kept her alive. As the cabin came into view, wolves emerged from the forest shadows. They didn't approach. They had learned to respect this human boundary, but their presence was a reminder. Mila was still part of their world too, and always would be. The question was no longer whether she could be both human and wild, but how to honor both sides of her nature in a world that demanded she choose. The government man arrived on a Tuesday morning, his black suit and formal bearing marking him as clearly as a brand. Indian Agent Charles Pemberton. His card read, Bureau of Indian Affairs. Luke watched from the cabin doorway as the man's carriage approached, his gut tightening with foreboding. Mr. Morrison, Pemberton greeted, not bothering to dismount. I understand you're harboring a young Apache woman who's been living wild. She's recovering from an injury, Luke said carefully, and she's free to come and go as she pleases. Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Pemberton produced a sheaf of papers. According to federal law, all Apache Indians must be accounted for and properly supervised. This girl needs to be in a government school where she can be civilized. Mila appeared beside Luke, having heard the conversation. She'd been working in the garden, dirt under her nails, her hair tied back with a leather cord. The sight of the government man made her tense like a deer scenting hunters. I am civilized, she said clearly. I speak your words. I wear your clothes. What more you want? Pemberton's eyes narrowed. Proper education, Christian instruction, complete integration into American society. The Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania has an excellent program. No. The word came from both Luke and Mila simultaneously. This isn't a request, Pemberton said coolly. I have the authority to remove any Indian who poses a threat to civil order. A girl who lived with wolves certainly qualifies. She poses no threat, Luke argued. Ask anyone in town. Mr. Garrett was quite vocal about her violent tendencies. Sheriff Watson confirmed there was an altercation. Garrett provoked her. The specifics don't matter. Pemberton dismounted, approaching with the confidence of a man backed by federal authority. She comes with me voluntarily, or I return with soldiers. Your choice. Mila backed away, her breathing quickening. Luke saw her glance toward the forest, calculating distances, escape routes. He caught her hand gently. We'll fight this, he said quietly. Legal means first. That afternoon found them in the office of Marcus Webb, the only lawyer in Perdition who'd take their case. Webb was a thin, nervous man, but his eyes were sharp with intelligence. The law's clear, Webb admitted. Reviewing the papers, the government has broad authority over Indian affairs, but, he paused, thinking, there might be a way. Miss Mila, do you have any documentation of your birth, baptismal records, anything proving your identity? Mila shook her head. All burned, all gone with family. Then we need witnesses. Someone who knew your family can testify to who you are. Samuel Whitehorse. Luke said immediately. He knew her father. Webb nodded. Good. We'll also need character witnesses. People who can testify that she's adjusting to civilized life. He looked at Mila. The more normal you appear, the better our chances. The next days were a whirlwind of preparation. Mrs. Patterson, won over by her daughter's affection for Mila, helped teach her more refined manners. Dr. Hayes provided medical testimony about her intelligence and capacity for learning. Even Thompson from the general store grudgingly admitted she'd been no trouble during her visits. But Pemberton wasn't idle. He'd set up residence in the hotel, interviewing townspeople, building his case. Garrett and his associates were only too happy to provide damaging testimony about the wild woman who threatened their community. The hearing was held in the town hall, Mayor Bradshaw presiding with obvious discomfort. The small room was packed, supporters and detractors alike drawn by the spectacle. Luke sat beside Mila, feeling her tension like a physical force. Pemberton presented his case with cold efficiency. The girl had lived as an animal. She'd lost human speech, human behavior. She posed a danger to civilized society and needed proper rehabilitation in a government institution. Furthermore, Pemberton continued, Mr. Morrison's relationship with her is highly inappropriate. An unmarried man living with a young woman, teaching her his own version of civilization? It's scandalous. Webb objected, but the damage was done. Luke saw the calculating looks, heard the whispered speculation. His attempt to help her was being twisted into something unseemly. When Mila was called to testify, she walked to the front with careful dignity, wearing the best dress Mrs. Patterson had provided, but Luke could see the wild thing beneath the way her eyes tracked every exit, the tension in her shoulders. State your name, Mayor Bradshaw instructed. Mila Crow Feather, she said clearly. Daughter of Joseph Crow Feather and Mary Lookingglass, Apache by blood, human by birth, survivor by necessity. Tell us about your years in the wilderness, Webb prompted gently. Mila was quiet for a moment, then spoke with simple eloquence. When soldiers kill my family, I am small child. I run to forest. Wolves find me. They not ask what I am. They see scared young one needing help. They teach me hunt, teach me pack law, teach me survive. They give me family when humans take mine away. And now? Webb asked. Now I learn human ways again. Luke Morrison teach me with patience, with kindness. I remember my mother's songs, my father's stories. I am both things now, Apache who remembers wolves, woman who remembers being child. Is this wrong? You lived as an animal, Pemberton interrupted, eating raw meat, running on all fours. I lived, Mila said firmly. When your people leave me to die, I lived. How is crime? The room stirred uneasily. Samuel Whitehorse was called next, his testimony bringing tears to some eyes as he described the Crow Feather family, respected, peaceful people slaughtered without cause. Then came the character witnesses, Mrs. Patterson spoke of Mila's gentleness with children. Dr. Hayes testified to her quick intelligence and rapid adaptation. But for every positive testimony, Pemberton had a counter-argument. She was unstable, unpredictable, a wild thing playing at being tame. Luke was called last. As he took his place, he met Mila's eyes, seeing fear there despite her brave facade. Mr. Morrison, Webb began. Tell us why you've taken responsibility for Miss Crowfeather. Luke considered his words carefully. I lost my family 3 years ago. I came to these mountains empty, looking for nothing but a place to hide from memories. Then I met her. He looked directly at Mila. She was wild, yes, different from anyone I'd known, but she was also brave, loyal, protective of those she considered pack. She reminded me that surviving isn't the same as living. And your relationship with her? Pemberton pressed. A man and woman living together unmarried? I've been her teacher, her protector, her friend, Luke said steadily. Nothing improper has occurred. But you care for her beyond friendship, don't you? Pemberton's voice was sly. A lonely man, a vulnerable girl. Yes, I care for her, Luke said simply, causing a stir in the room. I'd be a fool not to. She's shown more courage, more strength, more pure heart than anyone I've known. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. The room erupted in discussion. Mayor Bradshaw called for order. looking increasingly uncomfortable with his role as judge. Then Mila stood, her voice cutting through the noise. "I speak for self now." The room quieted. "You argue about me like I am thing, not person. Government man says I need school to be civilized. But I learn more from wolves about family, about loyalty, about honor than from people who kill for land and gold. You want make me forget wolf family? Cut out part of my heart to fit your world." She moved to the center of the room, her presence commanding despite her small stature. "I not ask for your acceptance. I not ask for your approval. I ask only for freedom to choose my path, to be both Apache and student, wolf daughter and woman, wild and civilized. America's supposed to be land of freedom. Yes? Then let me be free." The silence was profound. Then Emma Patterson broke free from her mother and ran to Mila, wrapping her arms around her legs. "Don't let them take her! Papa!" the child cried to the minister. "She's teaching me wolf songs!" Pastor William stood slowly. "Perhaps the child shows us the way. Suffer the little children to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven. This young woman has suffered enough. Let her choose her own path." Others began to speak, some supporting, some opposing. The tide was turning, but Pemberton had one more card to play. "Regardless of sentiment," he said coldly, "the law is clear. She goes to the school or—" A commotion at the door interrupted him. Sheriff Watson entered, holding a telegram. This just came from the territorial governor's office. He read aloud. "In light of testimony regarding Miss Crowfeather's successful adaptation to civilized life and the support of local citizens, the Bureau will not pursue mandatory enrollment at this time. Continued supervision by local authorities recommended." The room erupted again, this time with more cheers than protests. Pemberton's face flushed with anger, but he was beaten. Federal authority had spoken. As people filed out, arguing and discussing, Luke found Mila standing alone by the window, looking toward the mountains. Tears tracked down her cheeks. "Free," she whispered. "Like wolves, like wind." "Free to choose," Luke agreed. Standing beside her, she turned to him, eyes bright with tears and something else. "You speak truth about caring?" "Every word." She was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully. "In wolf pack, when two choose each other, is for life. No half-heart, no maybe. Is this human way too?" Luke's heart thundered. "For some humans, the best ones." "Then I choose," she said simply. "Choose you. Choose this place between worlds. Choose to be Mila, who runs with wolves and walks with humans." She paused. "If you choose to?" Instead of words, Luke answered the only way that felt right. He drew her close and kissed her. Gentle, careful, a question and promise all at once. For a moment she froze, the human gesture foreign. Then she relaxed, responding with the same fierce grace she brought to everything. When they parted, she touched her lips in wonder. "This is human marking? Like wolves touch noses?" "Something like that," Luke said, smiling. Outside, storm clouds were building over the mountains, but inside the hall, something new had been born. Acceptance, understanding, and the radical notion that someone could be more than one thing and still be whole. The battle was won, though the war for acceptance would continue. But Mila had something now she'd thought lost forever, the freedom to choose her own path, with a man who saw all of her and loved what he saw. Dawn painted the Arizona mountains in shades of rose and gold as Mila stood at the edge of the forest, her traveling pack at her feet. The wolves had come in the night, calling to her with voices that spoke of coming winter and the ancient need to follow the herds. She'd sat up in bed, Luke's arm around her, listening to their song with a heart torn in two. Now she stood between worlds, literally the cabin in town on one side, the wilderness on the other. Luke stood beside her, not touching, giving her the space to make this choice freely. "They need their sister," she said softly, watching the pack move through the distant trees. "Young ones must learn winter hunting. Ice Walker, the wolf you helped, he healed but not strong like before. Pack needs every hunter." "I know," Luke said simply. She turned to him, eyes bright with unshed tears. "But my heart," she placed a hand on her chest. "It lives in 2 places now. With them, with you." Over the past week since the hearing, they'd built something beautiful and strange, a life that honored both her natures. She helped Luke with the horses at Patterson Ranch. Her wolf learned patience, making her exceptional with nervous animals. She taught the town's children about tracking and forest signs. Their initial fear transformed into fascination, and at night, she and Luke would sit by their fire, sharing stories and silences with equal comfort. But the call of the wild never fully left her. Sometimes Luke would wake to find her gone, only to discover her sitting on the roof, howling softly with her distant family. She always came back to bed, curling against him with a contentment that seemed to surprise her each time. But he knew this moment would come. "What if," Luke said carefully, "you didn't have to choose completely?" She tilted her head in that familiar gesture. "Speak more." "Winter with the wolves, spring and summer here. Like the birds that fly south, they belong to both places." Hope flickered in her eyes. "Pack would accept, town would accept. The pack already knows you're different. As for the town," Luke smiled, "half of them are already taking bets on when we'll make it official. Mrs. Patterson has been dropping hints about wedding dresses." Mila's cheeks flushed. They'd spoken of marriage in careful, circling ways. She understood the human custom now, even if some aspects puzzled her. Wolves mate for life, no ceremony, just choosing. "We've already chosen," Luke said. "The ceremony is for the town, for the law, to protect you from men like Pemberton who might try again." She considered this with her usual directness. "Then we do ceremony, but first," she gestured to the forest. "First, I must tell Pack about choosing proper way." What followed was one of the most extraordinary experiences of Luke's life. Mila led him deeper into the forest than he'd ever gone, to a small valley where the pack denned. The wolves emerged slowly, the injured ice walker, the young female who'd watched from the ridge, several others, including pups from the latest litter. Luke stayed back as instructed while Mila approached them. The reunion was something from another world. Yips and whines, gentle nips and nuzzling. A dance of reacquaintance that needed no human words. The wolves circled her, sniffing carefully, reading the story of her time among humans in sense Luke couldn't begin to imagine. Then she did something that made his breath catch. She took his hand and led him forward, making soft sounds that seemed to be introduction and explanation combined. The wolves tensed but didn't flee. The alpha female, a magnificent gray creature with intelligent eyes, approached slowly. "No fear," Mila whispered. "She decides if you are pack friend." Luke held perfectly still as the wolf circled him, those wild eyes evaluating. Then, to his amazement, she brushed against his leg like a massive dog before returning to Mila's side. "She accepts," Mila breathed, wonder in her voice. "You are known to pack now. Protected." They stayed for hours, Mila using a mixture of gestures, sounds, and broken Apache to communicate with both Luke and the wolves. He began to understand. She was explaining her dual nature, her need to walk in both worlds. The wolves seemed to grasp it in their own way. They'd always known she was different. Now they understood why. As the sun climbed higher, Mila finally rose. The parting was bittersweet. Long looks, gentle touches, soft whines of farewell, but not goodbye. "See you when the snow flies," their body language seemed to say. On the walk back, Mila was quiet. Then suddenly she stopped, pulling Luke to face her. "I decide," she announced. "We do human ceremony now, today, before courage fails." Luke laughed, surprised. "Today? Mila, there are preparations, announcements." "No." She shook her head firmly. "Today I'm brave. Today I choose loud enough for both worlds to hear. Tomorrow, maybe fear comes. Today, we tell town, tell pastor, make it true." How could he argue with that? They returned to town hand in hand, Mila's chin high despite the stares. Their first stop was Pastor Williams, who received the news with a smile that suggested he'd been expecting it. "This afternoon?" He checked his calendar. "Well, the Lord works in mysterious ways. I can perform the ceremony at sunset if you wish." News spread through Perdition like wildfire. Mrs. Patterson immediately took charge, horrified at the lack of proper planning but determined to make it special. "Every girl deserves a beautiful wedding," she declared, whisking Mila away for preparations. Luke found himself in the company of Dr. Hayes and Sheriff Watson, who insisted on buying him a drink. "Never thought I'd see the day," Watson admitted. "Morrison getting hitched to the Wolf Girl. Town's full of surprises." "She has a name," Luke said mildly. "That she does," Watson agreed. "And she's earned her place here. I'll give her that. Garrett's still sour, but most folks have come around. Helps that she's so good with the young ones." As sunset approached, Luke stood in the small church, wearing his cleanest clothes, heart thundering. Half the town had crammed into the building, curiosity and goodwill mixing in equal measure. Then the doors opened, and his breath stopped. Mila walked down the aisle in a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had somehow produced, wildflowers woven into her dark hair. But it was her expression that caught him. Joy and terror and determination all at once, like a wild thing choosing to trust completely. The ceremony was simple. Pastor William spoke of love that bridges differences, of Ruth choosing Naomi's people as her own. When he asked for the rings, Luke produced 2 simple bands he'd bought months ago on hope alone. "Do you, Luke Morrison, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Mila Crowfeather, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Mila looked at Luke, then surprised everyone by adding, "In human way and wolf way, in town and forest, in words and silence, I do." When Pastor Williams pronounced them married, when Luke kissed his bride, the church erupted in cheers. Even some who'd been skeptical seemed moved by the obvious love between them. The celebration that followed was like nothing Perdition had seen. Tables were set up in the street, food appeared from every household, and someone brought out a fiddle. Mila, overwhelmed by the crowd and noise, stayed close to Luke's side, but her smile never wavered. As the evening wore on, she surprised everyone again by suddenly tilting her head back and howling, a sound of pure joy that echoed off the buildings. For a moment, the town froze. Then, from the mountains, came answering howls, her pack, celebrating with her in the only way they could. Little Emma Patterson immediately tried to copy the sound, and soon half the children were howling at the moon while their parents laughed, even stern Mr. Thompson was seen to smile. Later, as the celebration wound down, Luke and Mila slipped away to their cabin. They stood together on the porch, looking out at the town lights below and the dark mountains above. "No regrets?" Luke asked softly. "No regrets," she confirmed. "I am Mila Crowfeather Morrison, woman of 2 worlds, wife of patient man, teacher of small children, friend of wolves." She smiled. "Is good life?" "It is," Luke agreed, pulling her close. "It really is." As if in agreement, a wolf howled in the distance, not calling her away this time, but simply acknowledging. The pack knew where their strange sister was, knew she'd return when winter came, but for now, she was where she belonged, bridging worlds with grace, teaching tolerance by example, proving that love could indeed conquer the wildest differences. The stars emerged one by one, looking down on a frontier town that had learned something valuable. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in taming the wild, but in learning to live alongside it. Sometimes the best stories are the ones where nobody has to choose between being civilized and being free. In a cabin at the edge of town, a former cowboy and a girl who ran with wolves began their married life. Proof that even in the harsh Arizona territory, miracles could happen. The Apache girl raised by wolves had found her way back to humanity, not by forgetting her wild years, but by integrating them into a life richer and stranger than anyone could have imagined. And in the mountains, the wolves sang approval to the moon, knowing their packmate had found another kind of family, another way to belong. The world was vast enough for all kinds of love, all ways of being. Under the infinite sky of the American frontier, there was room for everyone, even a wild girl with a gentle heart, and the cowboy wise enough to love her for exactly who she was. Thank you for listening to this story. Dear audience, I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive through your own frontier? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reflections make our community richer, just like Mila's dual nature enriched perdition. Until our next adventure in the Old West, keep your hearts wild and your spirits free.